Welcome everybody to the launch of the second Mapping the Digital Gap 2024 Outcomes Report, based on research undertaken in 12 remote communities from 2022 to 2024. We're also launching the new Mapping the Digital Gap website today. But first, I'd like to introduce myself for those that don't know me. I'm Dot West, a Noongar woman from the southwest of Western Australia, and co-chair of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Group. I'll be your MC for today's launch. I'm joining you all from Rabibi, Broome, the lands of the Yarra and Juugan people. I'd like to acknowledge all elders, both past and present, from across this country, and pay our respects to their wisdom, guidance, and deep enduring connection to country, culture, and community. I also pay my respects to other First Nations people who've joined us today, along with welcoming all of you to this launch. Now, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap 2020 included Outcome 17, which stipulates that First Nations people have access to information and services enabling participation in informed decision-making regarding their own lives. And the target for this outcome is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have equal levels of digital inclusion by 2026. It was extremely difficult to get this target incorporated into the agreement because government was concerned about the lack of data to measure progress on Target 17. This is why the Mapping the Digital Gap research is critical to provide this data, particularly for remote and very remote communities where the digital inclusion challenges are greatest. The 2023 Mapping the Digital Gap report revealed the gap for First Nations people was 7.5 nationally. However, this increases to 24.4 in remote Australia and 25.3 in very remote Australia. With just over 1,500 remote and very remote communities in Australia, there is a lot of work to be done to address that gap. Fortunately, we've had strong engagement by the Australian Government and Minister Rowland on digital inclusion issues, including the establishment of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group to provide leadership, and also there was a $68 million budget measure in the 24 budget to help progress on Target 17. We've also seen good engagement by states and territories, especially to improve communication services in remote communities. On the 10th of December, Minister Rowland will be launching the Digital Inclusion Roadmap to address Closing the Gap Target 17. I invite you all to attend virtually. We will add the link to register to attend in the chat, but you need to be quick because it closes on tomorrow, the 4th of December. Unfortunately, Minister Rowland, Minister for Communications, couldn't join us in person, but she did provide a pre-recorded message for you all to view.
Hi, I'm Michelle Rowland, the Minister for Communications. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words at the launch of the Mapping the Digital Gap project at RMIT University. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands you are meeting on and pay respect to elders past and present and to First Nations people attending. I also acknowledge the co-chairs of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group, Dot West and Lyndon Ormond-Parker. Their leadership on First Nations digital inclusion is commendable. All Australians should have access to reliable and affordable connectivity and the skills they need to use digital technology to improve their everyday lives. The Albanese government is helping to bridge the digital divide, particularly for people living in regional and remote areas and First Nations communities. This work is supported by the FINDIAG, which is providing strong advocacy and advice. Their initial report helped to inform the Albanese government's programs like the free community Wi-Fi initiative for remote communities, a First Nations digital support hub and digital mentors program. The Mapping the Digital Gap project will improve the national data collection around First Nations digital inclusion. This is so important as we work to progress Target 17 of Closing the Gap, which aims for equal levels of digital inclusion for First Nations Australians by 2026. The project captures indicators of access, affordability, digital ability, media and information in First Nations communities. I acknowledge the significant contribution of RMIT and Telstra in collaborating with First Nations communities to better understand digital connectivity challenges. Thank you again for leading this important work, and congratulations on your project launch.
Thank you for that, Minister Rowland. Our next presenter is Lauren Ganley, Head of Telstra's First Nations Strategy and Engagement. Lauren leads Telstra's First Nations strategy engagement with First Nations peoples and communities. She has been an advocate of digital inclusion equity for remote communities for simply decades, and working within Telstra and through external partnerships and other collaborative efforts. Lauren sits on several boards of organisations that focus on supporting the aspirations of First Nations people. Lauren?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Larrakia people and pay my respects to elders past and present, and I'd also like to acknowledge my ancestors, the Kamilaroi people, and pay my respects to them as well. All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I quickly wanted to cover off some of the work that we're doing around digital inclusion, and I just wanted to share some new information around some things that we're doing around affordability, and then just share a quick project we've done around truth telling. Telstra has for the last 3 years been funding the Mapping the Digital Gap project, and these slides are from July this year when the team visited Wadeye in the Northern Territory. What we've found with this research is, as Dot mentioned, the importance of data collection, which is informing the work that Telstra is doing, and what's been really fantastic about it is that it's not only provided benchmark data, which Telstra will, views as important and will continue to fund for another 4 years. So that's, a good thing. But it's also, helping to inform where we put our efforts into addressing the barriers to digital inclusion. So one of the big issues and one of the highlights that will come out in the report that will get talked about a little bit later is around affordability, which is still a critical issue. And even though, there's been a lot of work to increase the footprint of coverage in remote parts of Australia, with our vast land mass, there are still plenty of communities that don't have access. But regardless, affordability has proven to be the biggest barrier to date. What Telstra has done in the last 12 to 18 months is listened to our stakeholders, listened to the work of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group. I'm a member of the expert panel, so listening to the feedback from critical stakeholders is we've developed a plan that was launched about a month ago. It's designed for remote communities. The plan is $1 a gig, up to 25 gigs, and with a 14-day expiry. So it was launched in 97 communities 4 weeks ago. We are still measuring and monitoring the take-up and the effectiveness of the plan, and we'll be happy to report how that's going and the impact that it's making. In addition to that plan, Telstra has also increased the the support for the Telstra top-up program, which is largely available in urban and regional areas. This slide is about the work that we're doing around digital, around digital literacy. So we've continued to roll out our community service program across over 20 remote communities in Northern Australia, and that's been through a First Nations program partner. Through the Telstra Foundation, we're doing work with Healthy Country AI, and that's about caring for country using technology, and that's working with women rangers from the Watercan Land Management in Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, and that's been a really fantastic project that has been extended to build the digital skills of the rangers, and the work that we've done around our First Nations contact centres is growing. We've increased the number of agents in the Darwin call centre. We've recently opened a new call centre in Townsville, and some of you may be aware of the community partnerships that we've got with Palm Island and Jumbin in Queensland, who are also managing customer calls for our remote First Nations customers. And this slide here, this is a project that Telstra has been working on for about 18 months with a First Nations storytelling business called Garawa, led by Kieran Satua. This story is about, well, it came about because 2 years ago it was the 150th anniversary of the building of the Overland Telegraph Line, and at that time there was talk about celebrations of acknowledging that the telegraph line connected us to the world for the first time. It was an amazing engineering feat. However, there was a story that needed to be told from a First Nations perspective. So the National Communications Museum commissioned the project, Telstra funded it, and Kieran from Garawa led the project, and the final result was a 17-minute film that was launched about a month ago, and you can view the film at that website, ncm.org.au. It's a very special film. It's we get to hear from a number of key stakeholders from around Barrow Creek and Tennant Creek. I thought that the film was amazing. I thought that the storytellers were very, very generous in the way that they shared the story, because as many people will know, the story is not a good story, but it's a truth-telling story that does need to be told. I think that concludes it. But one thing I did want to mention was that I didn't touch on the affordability page, was that Telstra has recently acquired Boost. Now, Boost is an affordable option available to anyone, and its price point is at $1 a gig. One thing that we did try to do in promoting Boost was that for remote community people, one of the deal breakers was that the call centre was offshore. So now that Telstra has acquired it, I'll yet to see that we can support people through our onshore call centres. So I will keep people posted on that front. Huge congratulations to Daniel, Lyndon and the team for leading this important research, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the research and what you've got in the report. So thanks very much, Dot.
Thank you, Lauren, for that. I'd now like to introduce Distinguished Professor Julian Thomas, who is Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, and a Distinguished Professor in the School of Media and Communication at RMIT University. Julian has led the Australian Digital Inclusion Index research from its inception in 2015. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much, Dot. And here I'm speaking to you from Naarm, Melbourne, here at RMIT, and wanted to acknowledge that we're on Wurundjeri country here, acknowledging all elders from across the country and paying our respects to all First Nations people who've joined us today. Now, the Mapping the Digital Gap project, just to give you a little bit of background before we turn to our key findings, but the project, as we've said, developed out of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which has been a project we've been working on with Telstra, providing a national, state and regional level view of digital inclusion across the country since 2015. The Mapping the Digital Gap project was established to provide critical remote First Nations data to augment and supplement our Australian Digital Inclusion Index. Up until this project, the Mapping the Digital Gap project, we had very limited insight into digital inclusion for First Nations peoples, especially in remote Australia. The work is a collaboration, as the Digital Inclusion Index itself is, with Telstra, with our colleagues at RMIT and Swinburne, who are part of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. That's a mouthful. It's a complicated name. We just call it ADM+S for short. But the work is a collaboration and a true partnership. The index has always relied on survey data to measure digital inclusion across several dimensions. Because digital inclusion is a complex problem, we look at it from a few different angles. The three dimensions are access, affordability, and digital ability. And that allows us to understand how digital inclusion varies across Australia and across different groups of people. It enables us to measure that over time. The Mapping the Digital Gap project has been critically important because it has enabled us to expand on that, to include, as I said, remote First Nations communities, and also to include the other ways in which people access information, including through more traditional media, such as radio and television, which continue to be very important, as well as public telephones and Wi-Fi. And we know that those modes of access are often the only modes of communication in small communities and in homelands. So just to say a little bit more about this, we've been going since 2022, we're 3 years on now, as we've been saying. The team has been working with 12 remote communities, undertaking surveys, interviews, collecting other data, and tracking changes in the scale and nature of digital inclusion over this 3-year period from 22 to 24. Now, research within and across First Nations communities, of course, requires engagement with the communities themselves, with their organisations, with their leaders, with their members. We have, therefore, set up partnership agreements with First Nations organisations in each of the 12 communities we've worked with. And they, in turn, have employed local co-researchers who have worked with our team in undertaking the research. And they've been a very big part of the work we're reporting on today. So it's the result of a larger collaborative model And that's what's ensured, we think, the success of this project and the mutually beneficial outcomes from the research. Now, as Dot and Lauren have explained, First Nations digital inclusion remains a crucial issue, recognised in the establishment of that very important Closing the Gap Target 17 in 2021. There's a great need to understand and improve digital inclusion for First Nations peoples. That target says Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people must have access to information and services enabling participation in informed decision-making regarding their own lives. And as we've said, that requires engagement with the communities themselves, their organisations and leaders. So the Mapping the Digital Gap project has aimed to provide a reliable baseline to measure progress towards Target 17 of that framework, which can inform policy and initiatives from community right through to the government. As a result of bringing together all of the information that we need to provide the evidence base for this kind of work, in 2023, we were able to establish a dashboard on our Australian Digital Inclusion Index website, which shows the scale and the nature of the digital gap for First Nations people, clearly for the first time, looking at remoteness, looking at those three dimensions of digital inclusion that I mentioned, access, affordability, and digital ability, along with the particular results for the 10 Mapping the Digital Gap research sites at the time. Now, we do the data collection for the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, the national data collection, every couple of years. So this year, unlike last year, we don't have a comparative 2024 data set for ADII to create updated index scores this year. So we will be updating that dashboard next year following our current data collection. But to give you a feel for the data that we have collected over the 3 years of Mapping the Digital Gap, we have found a considerable digital gap between First Nations and non-First Nations people in Australia. The gap is particularly pronounced for First Nations people living in remote locations and very remote locations. So these are very substantial gaps. They're of the order of 24 points in our Digital Inclusion Index scale. Although that gap for First Nations people exists across most areas, regardless of remoteness, access is a critical issue in remote First Nations communities. Now, in the report that we're releasing today, our 2024 outcomes report, we've taken a slightly different approach, focusing this time on the changes that we've seen over the 3 years of data collection across the 12 communities. And this has given us some unique insights into the level of engagement with the internet and digital services, with how people are using mobile communication services and other digital tools, in terms of the affordability of communication services and in the way people are accessing news, media, and entertainment. So one of the key findings relates to improvements in terms of internet access and usage across the communities. We've seen a 6% increase in the number of people using the internet, up from 80% in 2022 to 86% in 2024, and that's very significant. But it still means that there are 14% of those communities who are non-users, and that remains a significant and challenging gap compared to just the 3% of other Australians who were non-users of the internet in 2022. So there's still a significant gap there. We've also seen an increase in the number of people using the internet, at least on a daily basis. So that's a more frequent use, up from 44% in 2022 to 62% in 2024. So those are promising signs that progress is being made on closing the digital gap, particularly as a result of expanded mobile and Wi-Fi coverage in the key communities. But not all results are moving in the right direction, with household cost for communication services increasing as demand increases and digital ability levels seeing only minor improvements over the period we've been studying. I'll leave it to Lyndon and Daniel to provide more detail on these findings shortly in remote, and those findings we think illustrate the unique challenges of digital inclusion in remote First Nations communities and some of the issues, some of the initiatives that can address those. But let's now formally launch the second annual Mapping the Digital Gap report. It provides a fantastic overview of the findings from 3 years of research visits to the 12 communities from 2022 to 2024. The report that we're releasing today covers key findings in those critical areas of access, affordability, and digital ability, and access to media and information services. It provides context and findings for each of our 12 research sites. It provides deeper analysis of trends across those 3 digital inclusion index dimensions. And it provides data that illustrate the crucial role of service delivery and news and media access in these communities. You'll also find case studies, some great photos, some testimonials, some quotes from interviews that highlight the on-the-ground experience of residents and service providers across the research sites. So it just remains for me to thank everybody involved in all the extraordinary work that's gone into the preparation of our report being released today. A big thank you to Telstra and Lauren in particular, to the First Nations Expert Advisory Group, and especially to our research team. You can see them all up there: Daniel, Lyndon, Kieran, Jenny from RMIT, Sharon from Swinburne, Leah, who works on our report design, communications and engagement, Kieran, who does so much work as well on our report drafting and writing, and Lucy Valenta, who works on coordinating a very complex project, and all our operational and business staff at ADM+S. We also have a couple of new members of our team who are going to make important contributions to this project in future years. So welcome to Dr. Heron Laban and to Shane Borden. And also, of course, many thanks to all of those critical co-researchers in the communities we've worked with. So handing back to you, Dot, from now. Thank you.
as First Nations communities living in remotely, we've already got the cost of living pressures exacerbated, food security issues, border security, like biosecurity. You know, in terms of Torres Strait region, it's a very sensitive kind of spot in the world, and communication is vital for those kind of issues.
Our third year with the RMIT University mob, mapping the digital gap. Collected data from all the community members and stakeholders. Community is very happy with the feedback or the report that you guys give back to the community, and so they see that what they've been giving you guys is helping you guys to help us back. So
I enjoyed the work, and I'm happy I got to do it alongside one of my relatives, my cousin. Also, we learned a lot, and yeah, I hope to do more work like that one day. But I've learned a lot, so thank you for giving us the opportunity for do this project with you. We will miss you for taking us out fishing, but.
I am. I've been facing a lot of challenges regarding staying connected. When you don't have a proper mobile coverage, you know, or phone connections or anything like that, internet connection, it's hard to stay in contact with mob once they leave community, and it's because of the poor service that we do have here.
How many people do you think you've talked to this week?
By myself, I probably would have done about 70 surveys.
That's probably the most any person has ever done with us as a co-researcher.
When you first arrived, we'd had only just gotten the Activate Me Wi-Fi right throughout. So other than that, community members had to get their own, Activate Me services in their houses. But now every house in Clumberoo, every business, and that has a Wi-Fi system. So, and because we're so remote and we always get forgotten, for things like this, this is the first time it's been tried in the community, and it's a game changer for all of us. Basically, the partnership with RMIT for the digital mapping and the research part of it has been awesome. It's basically highlighted a lot of areas that majority of us wouldn't think of on a day-to-day basis. It also highlights the fact that the remoteness of Clumberoo and what is needed for these parts of the world, and what can be done, what needs to be improved, and and what still is a possibility.
So to speak more about the research, I'd like to invite the Principal Research Fellow with the Mapping the Digital Gap project, Associate Professor Lyndon Ormond-Parker, who is an Aboriginal man of Alewa descent from the Barkly Tableland region of the Northern Territory. Amongst many roles Lyndon has, he is also an Australian Research Council Research Fellow with the Centre for Heritage and Museum Studies at the Australian National University, and alongside me being co-chair of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group. Lyndon?
Thanks, Dot. Also, thanks, Lauren and Julian. I'd also like to acknowledge the Bunurong and Warrawong people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm in Melbourne, where I'm calling in from. As mentioned by Julian, we've been conducting this research in 12 remote communities across Australia over the last 3 years. These were selected due to diversity by geography, context, size, remoteness, media and communication services available. This provides us with a richer understanding of how digital inclusion is impacted by social and cultural contexts and the types of services available in each community. The project methodology follows guidelines for ethical research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities, including the Australian Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies and the National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines for working with Aboriginal people. We also had First Nations guidance during the development of the project from First Nations Expert Advisory Group, which included Lauren Ganley, Scott Winch and Heron Loban joining us here today. As you saw in the film, a key element of our approach to the project has been collaboration with First Nations organisations as research partners in each research site. They in turn employ community co-researchers to support the research. The co-researchers are instrumental in recruiting participants, in conducting the surveys, offering interpretation of the surveys in local languages so that participants can fully understand the questions that they are being asked. Our partners help to build community trust and engagement. Participants are also paid for their time. And would like to thank all of our 12 research partners and all of those surveyed and participated. Our approach has led to a strong community engagement in the research. Over the last 3 years, we have conducted 32 research trips and worked with 44 co-researchers to undertake over 2,063 surveys and around 350 interviews. We've provided all research findings back to each community as individual community outcome reports as part of our commitment to sharing all data back with communities. These are updated with the new findings each year, with 21 outcome reports completed to date. These reports include suggested community-led solutions to address identified issues as a local digital inclusion plan for each community. In our 2024 outcomes report, there is a 2-page summary of findings from each of the 12 communities. These provide a brief profile for each community, including the size and remoteness and communication services available in each site. Our report outlines key findings for each community, along with a description of the most significant changes in terms of the impact on digital inclusion. While there were many positive changes, such as the introduction of mobile or Wi-Fi services, some indications suggest a negative impact for community digital inclusion. For instance, in December 2024, in Wujal, the floods there destroyed much of the community, including the communications infrastructure, which left the community without access or any communications at a critical time during the evacuation and cleanup periods. The report also draws on the combined results from all communities to provide a more high-level trends, while specifically referring to examples from each site. I'll briefly outline some of the key findings. Of the 3 dimensions of digital inclusion, access, affordability, and digital ability, we have seen the most progress in the area of access. Building on what Julian outlined, as well as a 6% improvement in the number of internet users, we have seen a 12% reduction in the number of people without any form of internet access. This is largely a result of the improved mobile and Wi-Fi infrastructure in these communities. For instance, we've seen the introduction of a small cell mobile tower in Jarragon in 2022 and a new 4G tower in Yullamoo in 2023, where there was no previous coverage. We've also seen the introduction of Wi-Fi hotspots in Errab Island, Wujal, and a community Wi-Fi mesh network in Columbaroo and Warrakurna. As a result of the expanded Wi-Fi access, we have seen a 31% increase in the people accessing the internet via free public Wi-Fi, up from 15% in 2022 to 46% in 2024. Daniel will speak a little bit more about the Wi-Fi mesh networks shortly. While access has improved, we found that affordability remains a key barrier to digital inclusion in remote First Nations communities. With the very high cost of living in remote communities and increased demand for online services, as well as social media, music and video streaming and more, household expenditure on mobile and internet services has gone up over the last 3 years. Our survey has found that the average household expenditure per month has increased by $88 from an average of $203 in 2022 to $291 in 2024. For a large household of 8 to 10 people, the increase has been even greater, up from 226 in 2022 to 407 in 2024, an increase of $181 per month. 59%, or nearly 2/3 of those surveyed, reported sacrificing or cutting back on essential service costs such as food and other bills to afford the internet in 2024, up a dramatic 41% from 2022. In 2024, 73% of those surveyed reported making compromises on their speed and/or data of their internet services enabled to afford it. This was up 38% from 2022. It is hoped that the introduction of initiatives such as the free community Wi-Fi networks and the work of the NBN with the new 23 communities and the new Telstra community prepaid mobile plan will help reduce affordability pressures in the coming years. In terms of digital ability, we have seen some minor improvements over the last 3 years. For example, in 2024, 4 in 5 people reported participating in online activities compared to 3 out of 5 in 2022. We have found there has been a 17% increased engagement in social activities and entertainment and cultural activities, including engaging with social media, online music, videos, and games. This highlights that First Nations people are engaging in online activities that are relevant to their lives and communities, despite significant barriers around access and affordability. Daniel will describe some demographic groups that have not had the same levels of improvement. So I'll now hand back to you, Dot, in the studio. Thanks.
Back to the studio. Yeah, sounds like you're on a television show there, Lyndon, reporting out in the field, which you are. So now let's take the opportunity to hear from the lead researcher on the Mapping the Digital Gap project, Dr. Daniel Featherstone, Senior Research Fellow at RMIT and part of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. Take it away, Daniel.
Thanks very much, Dot. So I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we are today, the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to all First Nations people present today and in the regions where we've undertaken our research. I echo Lyndon's recognition of the important contribution to this project by our community partners and co-researchers. I'd like to acknowledge the inspiring First Nations leadership that we have on digital inclusion in Australia. And of course, that means the work that Dot and Lyndon have been doing as co-chairs of the First Nation Digital Inclusion Advisory Group, as well as all of the other members of the advisory group and the expert panel who've been working tirelessly to highlight the barriers to digital inclusion for First Nations people. And a huge thanks to Lauren Ganley and Telstra for the ongoing support for this research and the practical efforts to develop solutions. I'd also like to thank Minister Rowland for her presentation today and to the Australian Government for engaging in a really meaningful way to help address Closing the Gap Target 17, as well as state and territory governments and industry for their collective effort. The good news is we are seeing some progress, but there is still much more to be done. And finally, I want to thank all of our amazing team here at ADM+S that Julian outlined for their contribution to the research and the huge effort to prepare for the report in time for today's launch. Thank you all very much. A special call out to our Communications Officer, Leah Hawkins, for the fantastic design work on the report and the late nights preparing the films and website, all the time smiling. I'll now share some additional findings from the research, as well as one of the case studies in our report. So building on what Lyndon outlined, I'll talk to some of the other findings in terms of access. We've seen the number of survey respondents who own or share a mobile phone increase slightly from 71% to 74% in 2024. However, this compares with 98% of other Australians over 18 who owned a mobile phone in 2022. While this increased uptake is positive and reflects increased mobile coverage and internet use, we are seeing an increasing trend that people are mobile only. We've found a 19% drop in First Nations households with a computer, down from 34% in 2022 to 15% in 24. What that means is there's a lack of computers for people to learn to use applications needed for schooling, in workplaces, and for other applications that require a desktop. There's a lack of those access facilities in these communities. At the same time, we've seen low uptake of fixed home internet, with only 7% of households having ADSL or Sky Muster, which is the same as what we saw in 2022. The only slight change is that about 1% of households now have Starlink services. In comparison to that, 88% of other Australian households had fixed internet in 2022. And generally, the quality and reliability of those services in urban and regional Australia is much improved compared with those in remote communities. A key factor in the low uptake of fixed household internet is that most options are postpaid only and can involve excess data costs, and that creates risks for people in meeting monthly bills when they're due. Looking at affordability, of the 74% of respondents who own or share a mobile phone, what we have found is 99% of these are on prepaid services. This is a slight increase since 22, when it was 97%. We heard from interviewees that prepaid is their preferred option because it's more flexible and enables recharge when the money is available. However, we did hear that many people are using up their recharge data in much less than the 2 weeks between pays, and they often have to go without access for that additional period. Cost of devices can also be a challenge, particularly with the high turnover and transfer of devices to family members. In 2024, we found that 57% of households in remote communities have fewer mobile devices than is needed to meet all of their needs and to be considered digital inclusion. And that's an increase from up by 8% since 22. And this need we base on household size and composition. So all members who are 12 years and older would need to have a phone to be able to do the things that they need. The lack of devices means there is more requirement for device sharing, which has implications for access and safety, particularly with many older people having reportedly giving phones away to family members and being without access. Moving to digital ability. Due to not having index scores in 2024, we decided to use the Internet Skills Scale to create digital ability scores out of 30 to enable comparison between our results from over the 3 years. This score is derived from the 6 key skill types: basic skills, advanced, information navigation, social communications, creative applications, and smart device use. Using this method of scoring, we identified some really significant demographic gaps by age, education level, employment type, ability or disability, as well as gaps in terms of the types of devices used. So for instance, the average measure of digital ability in 2024 was 15.3. However, and that's an increase of 1.9 points since 2022. So we've seen a slight increase. However, that's a significant gap in digital ability compared to 23.2, which is the national average. So we've still got a long way to go. In terms of some of those demographic gaps that I mentioned, we've seen a 9.3 gap in education levels between those who have completed vocational training, such as Certificate 3 or 4, compared with those who have not completed secondary school. This illustrates that education is a really key determinant of digital ability. In 2024, those with computer access in the home or regular access scored 21.8. That was 4 points higher than those who were mobile only. We also saw those with access to a computer improved their rate of digital ability over the 3 years. There's a distinct gap between younger and older groups, with a huge 12-point gap between those in the 18 to 24-year age group and those 65 years and older. We also saw a 14.5-point difference in digital ability between those employed in professional and technical roles in the community, who scored 25, which is close to national averages, compared with those who were out of the labour force. Understanding these demographic gaps helps us in identifying targeted support measures needed to address digital ability needs. We know that digital mentors is a culturally appropriate and effective means of providing digital skills transfer through on-the-ground support. And fortunately, one of the budget measures announced this year was a digital mentors program with support from a First Nation digital support hub. That program will hopefully demonstrate the effectiveness of that model of support. However, with hundreds of communities across the country, we hope that it can be quickly expanded to meet this urgent need. Moving to media and information. In the past 2 years, we've found a reduction in the use of traditional broadcast media and an increase in online streaming. And while that's consistent with national trends towards preference for online and on-demand content, the reasons for this are slightly different in remote communities. So for instance, one key contributor to the reduction in use of TV services is the lack of working VAST or viewer access satellite television services, which are on each household in remote communities. 61% of households are now unable to access free-to-air TV. And that's an increase from 50% back in 2022. So it's a huge number of houses that can't get those TV. And that lack adds to the reliance on mobile and online services to access news and entertainment. And it also adds to household costs and increases the congestion on those mobile networks. There are calls to return to local broadcasting in larger communities and upgrade the vast equipment in those smaller communities and homelands. We've also seen reduced access to radio services, and this is often a result of lack of maintenance in some of the communities we've visited due to limited funding for technical support to replace faulty equipment. Remote media organisations such as Pilbara and Kimberley Aboriginal Media have been trying to deal with this by installing Starlink services in all their RIB sites and setting up remote monitoring equipment to quickly identify faults and undertake those repairs. Some of the other things that we've seen are 70% of people are accessing their daily news and information through direct and face-to-face communications. So not through TV or online. Face-to-face is still the main way people get their information. That's followed by Facebook and then commercial TV. 66% used YouTube to access TV and online media services in 24, up from 30% in 2022. This was followed by streaming services, and again, commercial TV came later. 49% of people access radio and music via streaming services on their phones, generally on-demand services like Spotify and YouTube. And so that's really seen a significant change to online delivery of communications. I'm going to do a little case study now. So we've got several case studies in our report, but I'll share one of those that Lyndon referred to and we heard from Madeline in our video earlier. In the last 5 years, there's been a growing number of Wi-Fi mesh networks rolled out in communities around the country, mostly in sites with poor or no mobile coverage, and that's to address the low levels of household internet take-up. Building on a WA government trial of community-wide Wi-Fi mesh networks since 2018, this model has now been expanded to 7 communities across WA, including Columbaroo in the northernmost part of WA's Kimberleys, one of our research sites. The Columbaroo Wi-Fi mesh network was installed in late 2021 under the Regional Connectivity Program, and that covered 7 years of operation. 128 dwellings, so basically all the buildings in the community, were networked up with Wi-Fi repeaters and the little VoIP phone you can see in the picture. And these have enabled people to have inside the house internet access as well as make calls. There were several early issues due to lightning strikes hitting some of the towers and dropouts in wet season and some power outages, but mostly they have been resolved. Initially, there was data was purchased on a prepaid model of at $3 per gigabyte, so people had to go and buy those little vouchers at the store, but this proved to be very expensive for users as well as unwieldy. When NBN introduced the Sky Muster Plus premium service in 2023, which had unlimited data, the system was upgraded to enabling unlimited download and faster service. What we saw was that data usage quickly increased from 1.4 terabytes per month up to 13 terabytes, and it's pretty much stayed close to those levels since that time. Going across to the next community, Warrakurna in the Ngundra lands of WA, there is another type of Wi-Fi mesh network that's been rolled out by NBN as a trial in 4 communities across the country. So Warrakurna is a community of about 200 people that has reasonable mobile coverage, but significant affordability challenges. The network consists of a hub site with 3 satellite dishes on the community office, providing backhaul, and a small tower with microwave links to 13 hotspots spread around the community. You can see that on the map. And also in high traffic areas around the community. There's 3 public buildings that have internal Wi-Fi, but most of the access is actually outside of houses. So because there's low penetration of Wi-Fi through metal walls. Data usage was initially limited, but went up, like in Columbaroo, significantly when the Sky Muster Plus premium service was switched on in mid-2023. And like in Columbaroo, the community have taken an active role in managing the network, including switching off in specific locations at night and blocking unwanted content. Community feedback was initially very positive. And people basically described it as a game changer when this was introduced. However, when we returned in 2024, we found that some people really wanted the internet access inside their home rather than having to sit outside on the veranda, especially at night, and for privacy when using voice and online services and for streaming content on the TV. However, this model is lower cost to deploy and maintain than the WA model. So as a result, NBN have been funded to expand this model to another 23 communities around the country. And that includes a couple of our other research sites, Gangan in the Lanapoi homelands and Galawinku. And this was one of the budget measures that Dot referred to earlier. There are several other case studies in our report on the use of social media for social and cultural activities and the impact of bank closures on remote communities. But I'll let you go and find those in the report, and I'll hand back to Dot.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. So shortly we'll be having a Q&A session with our speakers today. So if you have any questions, please use the Slido link provided in the chat. So whilst you get your questions ready, let's invite Daniel back again to launch the new Mapping the Digital Gap website. Daniel?
Thanks, Dot. And again, I just want to thank the team, particularly Leah's work on this to have this ready in time to present today. So the Mapping the Digital Gap website is really a place for us to share all of the resources that we've created through this project over the 3 years. It's got some information about the project itself, the aims and objectives and the methodology, the way that we go about doing this research in the communities. It also provides the publications, so our outcomes reports and those community reports that we've provided back to each of the communities, and a background paper which provides a bit more information about the project. There's some fantastic pages here from each of our research sites, so you can go in and look at each of the sites and see some of the work that we've done in each of those sites. So if you go down, you'll see a bit about the research partners and what we've found in each site, a little bit of a profile about each community. And there's some resources to help you find information, both as individuals as well as for communities and for the research community looking at First Nations digital inclusion. So we invite you to come and explore the website. It will be developing over time as we create more of our resources and source more information to put up there. But it's fantastic to finally be able to have all of this in one place. So thanks for all the work on that, Leah, and Ash as well for her work, and and we welcome anybody's input about what other types of resources you think would be appropriate to include on our website. I'll hand back, Dot.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. As I said before, if you have a question of any of our speakers today, please use the Slido link. But to kick it off, I've got a few questions. So firstly, Lyndon, having been to 12 communities over 3 years, do you find there are common issues, or do these vary for each site?
Some of the issues vary for each site, Dot. And so for the smaller communities, it may be the connectivity issues. So for instance, in Errab Island, there were connectivity issues up there. They highlighted the need for the use of Telstra mobile services when they're out on the water. So there are a whole range of localized issues, for instance, from Errab, and then going into the desert, a whole other range of issues. There are language barriers for some communities, in particular around the digital literacy and the digital connectivity issues, which you'll see highlighted in our report. But there are also some very positive stories that came out of some of our research, like the language work that Lala Gretchen is doing in Errab Island. We also have a video of Lala, which I will drop in the link, where she talks about End of the Line, it's called, and we'll drop that into the chat as well. But we've also seen, as you'll see from the report, more people are getting online. We're also seeing that there's been an increase in reporting of scams. And so it also really highlights the need for digital mentors in communities, and also the need for a place that people can go to find out information about getting online and getting online safely. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lyndon. And, you know, I noticed from the video, good evidence that both, you know, that the co-researchers also host you very well out fishing. So that's great, isn't it? Yep. Now, Daniel, what innovative solutions have you observed in these studied communities?
So we know that people in communities have to be fairly creative in the way that they access communications. We've seen some, you know, obviously the Wi-Fi has been a big part of expanding access, and people have been, there's a whole range of projects rolling out Wi-Fi in communities. One of the most innovative solutions has been the Centre for Appropriate Technology mobile hotspot, which was the only way that Yullamu community could access mobile coverage previously. So it's a big sort of satellite dish that concentrates the signal from Yuendamu. You put your phone in a little cradle and you can pick up the mobile coverage as long as you're in that one spot. So that was the way people were getting mobile services and able to talk using their mobile for quite some time until the new mobile tower was brought in. We've also seen lots of communities getting very innovative in providing locally relevant types of content and services. And so there's some fantastic community archives, language resources. In the report, you'll see some fantastic stories of the work that Lala Gutchin, who we heard in the video, is doing on language documentation and cultural preservation using social media. We've seen fantastic language teaching resources and some even use of virtual reality for people to be able to learn how to do trades and things that they wouldn't be able to do hands-on until they've actually experienced it through that technique. So there's been some really innovative approaches. Generally, the challenge is always having that good connectivity to be able to make most of these services work. So that's one of the ongoing challenges. But certainly with low Earth orbit satellites now and faster NBN Sky Muster, some of those previous challenges are not as significant as they were in the past.
Okay, Daniel, while I've got you here, we've got a question from Slido. Do you have any advice on designing inclusive digital services for government and other agencies?
Co-design. Basically, you know, because we know there's a real diversity of both languages, of the way that people engage with information, the types of services, there is no one way that people get their information now. And this is a real challenge. You know, previously we would say, you know, put it all out on the radio, but of course that's not necessarily the way that everyone's going to get their information. So we need different approaches, but working through local organisations that have those that understanding of their communities, making sure that the information is tailored and that those applications are really fit for purpose for that particular group, and they're going to look different across the country. So don't assume that you can create something in Canberra and it's going to work for everyone. It really does need that local co-design.
Yeah. And Lauren, a question for you. How does the results of this research support the work of Telstra and other telcos?
Yeah, thanks, Dot. So the numbers and data are always critically important, and they're important to people who are making decisions about funding. So what's been fantastic about last year, well, the individual community reports, then last year's full report, is that it's showing us the evidence that, you know, funders need to make sure that they're making the right investments. And this project has well and truly delivered all of that, because it's, you know, also given me the opportunity to pitch why we, you know, would want to fund this for another 4 years. You know, we've got the benchmark data, but we need to see how that is shifting over, you know, more than just this first 3 years of research. So, yeah, it's critically important. It has informed Telstra around, you know, addressing affordability, well, all the barriers, you know, digital literacy. So it's giving us the evidence to say that this is important and we need to invest in it to make a difference.
Thanks, Lauren. Lyndon, a question for you from Despina. If this team could have a wish on how to improve things before 2026, what would it be?
I think the first thing would be the rollout of a digital mentors program in regional remote Australia is a high priority, including digital literacy and connectivity literacy, and also improvements around that would help improve aspects of identification. So one of the huge barriers is getting online and getting online safely. Things like the two-factor authentication system and potentially a simpler way of being able to get online and get online safely. But I think in this digital world with the increase in scams, that's highly unlikely. So therefore, a really big push for a digital mentors program, which is being funded and is going to be rolled out over the next few years. So I'm really pleased to see how that is going to work, and if we can measure the impact of having those digital mentors on the ground. And Lauren could probably speak a little bit to the digital mentors that Telstra have supported and the work that she's done with the Ranger Group. Thanks.
Thanks, Lyndon. Julian, how does this project fit into the broader research agenda of ADM+S?
Thanks, Scott. ADM+S has been funded in order to build the evidence base and to guide policy and strategy for inclusive, responsible, and ethical digital services. And what we see from the research we've been talking about today is much more about what inclusive digital services might look like in this country and in those communities where we think they have a great deal to offer and also, of course, significant risks. So we, across the centre, across ADM+S, at RMIT and Swinburne and all the universities that are part of our research centre, we've learned an enormous amount from this research, from the communities we've worked with, about what inclusive digital services driven by AI and all sorts of other technologies might look like if they were to follow that sort of path of co-design that Daniel was talking about, and if they were to be built out of a genuine partnership between governments, business, universities, we think are important as well. The research side matters, but especially, of course, the communities and the people themselves. So we have learned a huge amount from this research for our broader research program. We think it has a lot to tell us about what the future of digital services could look like if we were able to do it properly in this country. Thanks, Dot.
Thank you, Julian. Now, Lyndon, another question for you is it's regarding the improved outcomes since 2022. Did the survey influence infrastructure improvements in these communities?
I hope it did. I think what it did highlight with the digital inclusion plans and the reports, we did have industry buy-in who were watching the research very closely, because it was, I think, one of the first times that this sort of research has been undertaken. And so it really did provide the research and evidence-based for improvements in some of the communities. So I think when NBN rolled out the free Wi-Fi to 23 communities, they could actually pick up some of our reports and see the actual need in those communities as an evidence-based in their prioritisation and selection of those in most need. Even though our report only covered 12 communities, it gave a good snapshot of those individual communities. One of the things, as you know, Dot, and swapping hats now as the advisory group for First Nations Digital Inclusion, that we've always said that we need to take a needs-based approach and try and address those communities where they have little or no connectivity as a priority, or where their connectivity really needs improving. I also noticed there's a couple of comments in the Slido around how do you select, is it better to put in access in a community of 20 or 200 people? Well, I think all communities, we say that connectivity is a human right, and that all communities should have some form of connectivity and communications in this day and age. And I think the work of Findiag and setting up the First Nations data map is one way of approaching that, so that we can then now map, if the industry and telcos provide data to that, we can see where the greatest needs are for our First Nations communities through that mapping exercise. And part of that has also been pushed from ADM+S and the Mapping the Digital Gap project to really address some of those gaps in the data, but also work out where the areas of most need are so that we can hit that target of closing the gap by 2026, which is very ambitious, by the way.
Okay, thank you, Lyndon. Daniel, was there a actual or perceived theme of distrust in digital services and data handling? Does access and ability help overcome challenges related to this?
Yes, there is absolutely distrust. In the same way that there's a lot of distrust in most government services, that applies in the online space as well. But also, you know, people like particularly elderly people are very concerned about going online. They are worried about the scams. They're worried about the cyber safety issues. They don't have the confidence in that space. And so overcoming that trust issue is a really significant part of starting to engage in using online services. And I think that that's where the digital mentors can play a really critical role in supporting people through to get started. Sorry, just give me the second half of that question again, Dot.
Oh, gee, you're pushing it here. Does access and ability help overcome challenges related to this? Related to the perceived or actual sense of distrust?
Yeah. Look, you know, obviously access when people can get online confidently and it's, you know, what we find is that if people hit roadblocks when they're trying to use online services, when they're trying to get connected, they'll give up trying after a while. They won't keep on going. So that it's much easier to go back into the community office or ask a service provider to help you to set up that online form or sign up for that service. And so people often outsource that work either to a family member or to a service provider simply because of that both mistrust, but also just having the skill gap of knowing how to use those services. That's the bit that needs work. So access is critical. Awareness of what is online is also a critical part of that.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Just for the speakers, just keep your answers short because we've got a few questions to get through before we finish in 8 minutes. So Daniel, while I've got you there, and now that I've primed you for a short answer, I've got another question for you. Where there is evidence of improved access, affordability and ability, are there also trends in access to education, services and economic opportunities?
Slow movement on that front. So what we're seeing is that the schools generally have really good connectivity and fantastic services available and applications available to students. Outside of the school environment in communities, it's actually really hard to find those spaces where people can do online learning and start to engage with other applications. And again, this comes to the lack of having those community access computers and facilities. So I think there's slow movement on that front. People are starting to get more familiar with using video conferencing for telehealth, for doing online training and so forth. But we do keep hearing that people prefer the face-to-face at this stage.
Thanks, Daniel. Lauren, the next couple of questions are for you. Are there concerns within the telecommunications industry about providing customer support in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages?
Yeah, there is support that, well, I can only speak for Telstra, where we, through the First Nations Call Centre in Darwin, well, we do have some people that speak other languages, but we also have access to the interpreter service. So, yeah, where people have low English or limited English, then yeah, there is definitely support, and we do see that as critical support.
Thanks, Lauren. And your next question is about the prepaid services by Telstra. They still seemed expensive and not cheaper than their regular plans. Are there ways it can be made cheaper for remote communities?
Yeah, so that was the design of the new community plan that launched a month ago. So that price point is $1 a gig, which is cheaper than, well, it's the cheapest plan that Telstra currently offers in terms of prepaid. And the idea was that we were looking to benchmark it against Boost, actually. And so yeah, what we're doing is, well, first of all, for a year we did some trials to monitor how often people were recharging, and while we did that, we were also offering bestowals so that people weren't paying more than they could afford. So that proved to be successful. We identified the 97 communities where people are doing multiple recharges a month. Like I said, the new plan launched a month ago. We are monitoring uptake and monitoring the impactfulness of that. So I think we need to wait a few months before we can see if it's a good thing or if there are any unintended consequences that we were not aware of. Thanks, Dot.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Daniel, how do you prioritise what is most important for a community when setting up initiatives? So it's a bit of a chicken and egg question, yeah? Connectivity, ability, or cost?
Yeah, so really that comes down to the community's own decision making about what the priorities are locally. But generally, you need the access first. So you need the good connectivity before you can then deal with, upskilling and giving people different applications that they can use. So connectivity is a fairly critical starting point. But it also has to be something that the community can afford to use. So those Wi-Fi mesh are great in that they aggregate use and make it more affordable across the community. But yeah, as I say, it's a place-based thing. So in our digital inclusion plans, we lay out all the different challenges and some options of solutions, but the community decide what is the order of priority for them.
Mm-hmm. I've got, I think this might be the final question. Let's see how we go. But I do want to ask it of Julian first. Julian, to what extent might a change in federal government impact this project?
I don't think we know the answer to that question, Dot. Certainly very interested to know, but at this stage, we would be hoping and expecting that any future Commonwealth government would have the same commitment to First Nations digital inclusion that we've seen in recent years. I think the work that's been done by the advisory group has demonstrated what's possible, and from here, what's most critical is that we continue to build on that.
Okay, and Lyndon, this same question was specifically for you as well, in terms of what might a change in federal government do to impact this project and the work of the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group?
Hopefully there will be no great impact on it. So we have had a lot of support from Minister Rowland in terms of establishing the advisory group, and Target 17 is actually part of the Closing the Gap framework. And so the Closing the Gap framework has bipartisan support. And one would hope that there would be continued support if there was a change in government for the Closing the Gap framework as a whole, including Target 17. And as we've discussed before, Target 17 also underpins a lot of the other targets in terms of education, health, and other outcomes, where to be digitally included is really important and underlines some of those other targets. And so I hope that there wouldn't be a change. Moving forward for the Mapping the Digital Gap project, we were pleased to see that Telstra is continuing to fund this research for another couple of years in another 8 communities, 8 to 10 communities moving forward. And of course, we have the commitment for the ADII moving forward as well, which Telstra is a key partner on that. So hopefully there's not a change of Lauren.
Thank you very much, Lyndon. Now, we've now reached right on time for the close of this outcomes report launch. I thank you all for your attendance. I certainly particularly thank the message from the Honourable Michelle Rowland, Minister for Communications, Lauren Ganley, also distinguished Professor Julian Thomas, Associate Professor Lyndon Ormond-Parker, and the Dr. Daniel Featherstone for their work, as well as for being able to be here today to give us more intel on closing the digital divide between First Nations people and other Australians, but also for the great work in mapping this digital gap that we need to close. The Closing the Gap report said 2026. It is a tall ask, but it means everyone's got to work together to ensure that we can achieve it, even if it's just slightly beyond 2026. So thank you very much for your time.